Welcome to Truly Rotten Potatoes, the filmmaker interview series where I, Declan, your host, am currently on a call with James Hunter, former Canberra filmmaker, now in Melbourne, to talk about his debut feature film, The Latcher. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Declan. Thanks for having me, man.
Let's start with how you got into filmmaking. I want to hear the first time you kind of remember picking up a camera or what sparked your love for filmmaking.
Yeah, it was a very early love of filmmaking. And I think, it's pretty much, as you say, it was picking up a camera from, I don't even know how old I was exactly, but I think I was probably around 6 or 7 the first time I kind of got my hands on my parents. They had like one of those old Sony professional cameras that you'd see newsmen wearing on their shoulders, like one of those really big bulky ones. And for some reason, they trusted me with that at a very young age and sort of playing around, experimenting, doing little stop motion videos with my toys and learning about that process and making little videos with my sister and my friends and little parody movies and things like that. And I assume it's probably when we met, working, or making films and, submitting them to the Lights Canberra Action Film Festival and, just all the great Canberra film festivals that just showed support to emerging filmmakers. I think that really helped kind of grow my confidence in, actually having my little films taken a bit more seriously or shown to an audience and kind of gauging the reactions from people in that sort of an environment. So I'd say that was pretty instrumental as well for me and probably for you.
Would you say that the first time you got to see your film in front of a big audience was Lights Canberra Action?
It would have been earlier than that. I think Short Seasons was the first one. Yeah, I think Short Seasons. I remember that was sort of one of the early ones that I got. I think that was the first one that screened anything that I'd made. Yeah.
Perfect. And did you have certain filmmakers or films particularly that like inspired you that you said, I want to make stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't think any of it was very conscious at that early age. But definitely like, growing up on the films of Tim Burton and Steven Spielberg and, those sort of heavy hitters before I really kind of developed my film education. I think it was more of the mainstream stuff that we were exposed to as kids. But I mean, they're legendary filmmakers, and people filmmakers still to this day will refer back to those sort of films that I was growing up with, like, Jurassic Park and, just the wonderful worlds that Burton would create with, like, whether it was Nightmare Before Christmas or Edward Scissorhands or, Beetlejuice, and even watching like Batman Returns way too early, but those films, they really made an impact on me, I think. And I think there was less sensitization in the 90s when we were kind of coming up, where I think it really did kind of, you're being exposed to all these crazy, dark and wild kind of worlds and particularly like Tim Burton stuff. I just remember making such an impact on me, like the German Expressionism influences. Of course, you don't know what any of that is when you're a kid, but it makes such a sort of large, it's like a nuclear bomb going off creatively. It just kind of made me want to know how they did that, I guess, or try to replicate it and understand through imitation or something like that. Yeah.
Let's talk about your very early short films, like the first ones when you were probably after you've picked up a camera, but once you're actually starting to be like, I'm making a short film now. Were you always writing and directing and producing and editing? And what were those first short films like?
Yeah, I was. I mean, just by virtue of the fact that I didn't know anybody else, that could do any of those things. And none of those sort of titles really held much weight to me when I was young. It was just, you just made it by any means possible, And so I remember my mum teaching me about editing software. I think like iMovie it might have been one before iMovie, but iMovie was the one that I remember I cut a lot of those shorts in early on. But yeah, those early short films, I remember I did a Cinderella. It was an adaptation of Roald Dahl's Cinderella. And I got all my friends at school to play different roles. I kind of cast my friends in the different roles of Cinderella and the stepsisters and the evil mother and all of that. And, yeah, and I just remember sort of, and doing it with that bulky camera. And we used to have like a piano stool, which I would use as a tripod because, a makeshift tripod because we didn't have a tripod. So Yeah, I think that was probably one of the earliest memories I have. Maybe one of the first short kind of narrative things that I did that was like a fully formed thing. And then the short seasons one I remember was like the idea was kind of cool. It was two kids that are playing chess, and there's kind of these cutaways as they're playing chess to them dressed in like full medieval, outfits as the queen, as the knight, and battling it out in this kind of wooded area. And then it kind of cuts back to them playing chess. And I think, yeah, that was a fun little short. I think that was the first one that sort of played to audiences in Canberra at short seasons. Yeah.
And short seasons you could get like $1,000 to make a film. Did you get that money, or were you just making them yourself?
Is that right?
Yeah, I think they would fund one. I think they would fund like one for $1,000 because I applied a couple of times and never got it.
Oh, wow. Ah, that's interesting. I don't remember that. Look, I was so young. I did. To me, it was just sort of a festival, like any other one where you just sort of, if you had a film under a certain, it was probably like, I don't know, 7 minutes or something like that. And you could, or it might have even been shorter for that festival. Hence the name. Yeah. I can't remember. But yeah, and then actually I remember one of the last films, which funnily ties into what we're going to talk about today. One of the last shorts that played in short seasons was, before the festival ended, I think, was a short horror film that I made. And it was the first horror. It was called End of Tape. The first sort of horror that I made, and then to play that in front of an audience. And I remember there used to be two theaters. I think it was at the National Museum, if I'm remembering correctly, and there was a theater upstairs and a theater downstairs, and both were sort of playing the festival at the same time. And I remember it got a big reaction from the crowd, which was really exciting. For a young, filmmaker to feel like you were having some influence on an audience was pretty cool and encouraging. And, so that was kind of one of those core memories, I think, that kind of boosted my confidence as a filmmaker and made me feel like, there's different, genres can be really fun to kind of play in and see the effect they have on people.
Yeah. That first hit of feeling like you successfully manipulated the audience to feel the way you wanted them to, and them enjoying it, is so exhilarating, and then we'll chase that forever.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, I think so much of what we do sort of like lives and dies by the audience reaction, and so there is an element of that, which isn't really an original thought that I've had, but that I've heard before, where it's almost like a magician, where you are trying to kind of understand the mechanics of the thing so that you're not sort of, you're not showing how you pull these things off. You're doing all the work behind the scenes, but ultimately you just want to kind of capture some authentic reaction or, emotional, expression from an audience. So, I think it's an interesting thing that we do, and the more I do it, and the more kind of technical, or the more I sort of fixate on process or technical things or structure and screenwriting and all of that, the more I just think, there's so much mystery to what we do. And the more you learn about it, the more you realize that like we've got none of it figured out. And half of it's like a science, and the other half I think is incredibly intuitive and just, almost intangible.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were having your film in short seasons, do you know how old you were roughly? Like, were you a teenager, or were you studying film at this point?
I think I was 11 or 12.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay, really?
I was really young, yeah.
That's super exciting.
It was. Yeah, and I remember sitting with my sister, who was, an actress in the film, and I think my friend who was the other actor in it, and we were kind of sitting there just kind of like nervous little kids about to watch our film. And yeah, it was I think I got hooked on that feeling, and, over the years watching the film with audiences, and especially during COVID and now in this climate, it's like, I don't take that theatrical experience for granted at all. I mean, it's, jumping forward a little bit, but the short film that I made, Nest, prior to making my feature, was released during COVID, and, it was selected for the Melbourne International Film Festival and released during sort of lockdown. And so I was actually accepted in the MIFF Accelerator lab, and all of that was online and was an amazing experience. But I remember just thinking, really reflecting during that time with the sort of festivals, the great festivals that we got into, and not always being able to go and see the film in person. What a huge kind of, like, how important that is in terms of, you know, if you imagine the earliest storytellers sitting around a campfire, you know, what were the elements you needed? You needed a storyteller, but you also needed an audience, you know, and the idea that during those dark days when we kind of didn't have that, or we couldn't feel it necessarily, you know, we weren't sharing the space, or we weren't picking up on any of those energetic cues. It was just kind of you know, it's being streamed on this website, and you're kind of getting feedback later. It felt really unnatural to me, and I realized that the communal experience is so important to me. And I think it was because of those early days growing up and experiencing films with audiences and feeling like that was the thing I got hooked on, and that was the reason why we did it, you know?
Yeah. So you're an actual child. You're like a child prodigy, getting films into public festivals at a really young age. I assume as you develop, you start to graduate to bigger films with a crew. And do you go to university or study filmmaking at all?
I did. I went to, so I was at Narrabundah College. I remember I was in year 11. I didn't actually even graduate year 12 at Narrabundah. I was in year 11, and I decided, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. There was nothing else that I had ever kind of been interested in, I guess, as a career path for myself. And was lucky to receive a lot of support through the schools that I went to. You know, was always really encouraged in that direction, and then also with the film festivals. And I had a really supportive family, and I remember dropping out of college and moving to Sydney for about a year, where I studied, I did a Cert 4 in screen at Metro Screen. So it's defunct now, but it was, at the time I was 16, I was the youngest student that they'd ever had, and I was one of 12 students in the course, and we had all industry professional directors. You know, Dean Francis was one of them, Michael Bates was another. And they were our teachers, screenwriting, directing, cinematography. They would choose sort of leaders in the fields to come in and tutor us and mentor us. And, it was a very practical course. We made our own shorts. We pitched our shorts to the filmmaking teachers. And I was lucky enough to, be selected as one of the directors, of a short film called Struggle, which then was, you know, won some awards and festivals. And
you're 16 at this point?
I was 16. Yeah. So that was another kind of great boost of confidence. And, you know, I guess just living away from home at that age, like it was in a way, it was like kind of crazy because, you know, I was forced to kind of grow up quickly, but then at the same time, I just felt like I was part of such a community of other filmmakers, and it was like its own little family, you know, and kind of set me up in that way for what filmmaking would feel like later on, where you kind of become part of this makeshift family, and then you go your separate ways, you know. But a lot of those people that I met in that course, or not a lot of them, but a few of them I'm still good friends with to this day. One of them's like, you know, one of my best mates. So.
Where were you living at 16 in Sydney?
My mum's brothers had a place in Bondi. And so they had like a downstairs and an upstairs, and I was in the downstairs, and one of my uncles lived upstairs. And so I had an apartment. It was a pretty sweet deal, really, when I think about it now. But at the time it was all just kind of overwhelming, you know, because you're at that age where it's like you're figuring yourself out, you're figuring the world out. But I guess it was just a nice, like, thing, having that continuity of filmmaking, because that, you know, had always been a part of my life. And so for some other people who were students in that course, they were sort of a bit, I think, maybe out of their depth or a bit nervous about, you know, stepping into this role. But whereas for me, it felt like part of my identity firmly at that point. Yeah. So I think I just, you know, I really enjoyed it. I remember walking from Bondi through, Centennial Park to Paddington, and it was in the Chevelle, underneath the Chevelle Theatre there in Paddington was where the film course was, where Metro Screen was. And Oh, I was born in Paddington, so it was a nice kind of full circle thing as well, where I just remember the sandstone and the smell and the air and the feeling. It just felt really good. It was just a really nice kind of time, in my life. It was sort of in a little bubble that was about to burst, and I was going to be back in the real world again. But it was, I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea about that. I'm so impressed by your ability to dive in, move away from home at such a young age. I didn't move out of my parents' house till I was like 24. I waited a long time. I went to uni in Canberra, so I played it so safe. But hearing that you were like already out there doing it, mixing it with people that are older than you, and then is that just 1 year or was it 2 years there?
Yeah, it was 1 year. Having said that, I should mention that after that sort of period of time in 2007, I did end up moving back to Canberra with my parents, and I did end up moving to Melbourne when I was about 24, 25. So similar to you, it was sort of it's a little stint away from home, sort of built my confidence up as a filmmaker, I guess gave me that qualification and that network. But I came back to Canberra. I worked at Prime Television as a production assistant. And until they, had a massive sort of outsourcing of a
lot of redundancies around there.
Do you remember that? Yeah. So I was one of them.
So you came back to Canberra. The first film I think I saw of yours would have been The Archive at Lights Canberra Action 2016.
That might have been where we met.
Yeah, because we were both in the top 12. You won a lot of awards that night. Definitely best film, best director, probably some of the technical ones, best sound. I won 0 awards. But do you remember my film that night?
God, you put me on the spot.
The point being, no one remembers my film.
I'm sure I would if you refreshed my memory.
I made this mockumentary about a guy who was a musician that like wouldn't show anyone his music.
Okay, yep. It's coming back to me.
So it was 2 actors. One of them was fictionally making the documentary, so it was like he was kind of the director of it, and he'd found out about this guy who was like a musical genius, but who like lives in a garage like I'm in right now and makes all his music and doesn't show anyone. He's like he used to be great, and now he's like, I just make it for me. And so the whole film is a guy trying to get this guy to show him some music by the end of it. And then he finally convinces him to do it, and the song is awful. And it's just like a long zoom in on the director's face as he's like, "This whole documentary was for nothing because this song is terrible."
Was Jared involved in that at all?
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, actually, both the 2 main guys were called Jared, so I don't know which one you're even talking about, but I'm assuming Jared Powell.
Well, that's Jared Powell. That's why I was ringing a bell, because I think I met you and Jared. I knew Jared previously, but I met you that night, and I think you and Jared were together, and we had a chat there.
Yeah. So after Lights Canberra Action, you have a lot of success. You get to make some cash from the winning of the prizes, which is still one of the only film festivals that seems to actually like give cash prizes, which is so cool. And the fact that it's still going is amazing. And then when do you, from after you do The Archive, when do you move to Melbourne and like take that second leap into the ocean?
Yeah, so I think The Archive was 2015, 16?
I want to say 2016.
2016, yeah. I think it was right after The Archive. It was either that year or the next year that I moved to Melbourne.
And what was the move to Melbourne spurred by? Were you always going to go there and try it in another big city? Did you get a job opportunity? What let you go to Melbourne?
Yeah, no, it was really just, I had a friend who, is just actually a really, like my sister's best friend, or one of them. And, she was living in Melbourne, and she had a share house, living in a share house in Carlton. And she knew that I was interested in moving to Melbourne because I had some other friends here. And, just with the history of Melbourne in terms of its connections to being like the birthplace of feature films, and so many things about Melbourne just felt like a good fit for me, I guess. And I felt that in Canberra I'd kind of tried my hand at a few different things and was sort of running out of options, or I wasn't too sure where I was going. And even though I love Canberra, but I decided to just take the leap, I guess, similar to Sydney. Just decided to kind of go out on a bit of a limb, and my friend, my sister's friend, had a opening at the share house, and so I just jumped. And living in that share house was amazing, and I I guess I didn't realize how good I had it. I've lived in quite a few different places in Melbourne, rented since I've lived here. And just the proximity to like Cinema Nova, which is an amazing kind of local theater here. And, to be able to walk, just catch a tram, go to the city, go to Carlton Gardens for jogs every day. Like I loved living there. So yeah, it was really just kind of prompted by, wanting a bit of a change and sort of wanting to see what the next step in my kind of filmmaking pursuits would be. I had also developed some features while I was in Canberra, and they didn't get off the ground, even with some amazing support from Screen ACT, and I was working with a couple of different producers, but they didn't kind of go anywhere. And so I think I was at a point I'd had a breakup of a long-term relationship, and I was just sort of looking for something new. So I think the move was sort of really needed.
Yeah. Were the features you were developing in Canberra, did you get like arts funding, ACT arts funding or anything?
No, not arts funding. It was Screen ACT supported me on a couple of occasions. We got to do some pitch scenes from the film. So there was a feature script that I'd written. It was set during World War One. Massively, ambitious kind of first feature to try to make. But I had Sophie Lowe and Reese Muldoon were cast, and I did a pitch with them, and we were working with. I was working with the producers, and there was another project after that, which was an adaptation of Maralinga, which I was writing and was trying to position myself to direct, and another huge ambitious project, about the nuclear bombs that the British set off as tests in the South Australia around the 50s. And so it was a crazy kind of time where I don't have any regrets, because I developed myself so much with Screen ACT's help and with like the mentors that I was working with during that period. But it was also, I guess, a little bit of a heartbreaking time when those projects fell through and had the end of this relationship, and I was just kind of like, what's next? So
fresh start, move to Melbourne.
I think fresh start was exactly what I needed, and but yeah, super grateful for that support, because I think without it, I wouldn't have developed myself as much as a screenwriter. I think I really learned a lot about screenwriting during that time. I remember I was put onto a book, the 21st Century Screenplay by Linda Aronson. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but I also did then, because of that book, reading that book, and it's just a brilliant book, which I still refer back to. I did a course, like a short course at Afters with Linda Aronson on sort of new structures in screenwriting. And, so yeah, that period of my life and those projects, even though they didn't eventuate, was a huge kind of learning curve for me that I really value. Yeah.
And when you're in Melbourne, is the first short film you make Dick?
Yes, I think it was. Yep, it would have been.
And that's more of a comedy compared to The Archive and some of your earlier horror stuff, right?
Yeah.
Was comedy something you always wanted to play with, or was it just trying to stretch yourself, try something new?
It's funny you mentioned, because a lot of the early films that I made were comedic, I guess. Being kids, you couldn't take them particularly seriously. So a lot of them were sort of parodies or were silly kind of comedies. So I felt like I kind of had a bit of confidence with the comedies. Horror was, something that was a new thing that I tried when I was, played at Short Seasons, but yeah, comedy kind of felt a little bit more in my wheelhouse. And I'm sure like you and so many other filmmakers, like I just love movies in general. It's not that I necessarily ever set out to just make one type of thing. And so, as a little black comedy, is based on a true story of a friend of mine had sort of told me this amazing story one day. We were just out at a cafe, and I just thought, could I get your permission to make this into a short? Because this is just an amazing story. And yeah, he gave me permission. We got, Greg Fleet, who I know you've worked with as well. The great Greg Fleet, Aussie comedian, in our short, which was cool. And also Oliver Ackland, who I'd worked with, previously, and just thought, was and is an amazing actor, and is like a Heath Ledger scholarship recipient. And I'd worked with him previously on a short film called Tin Man, which I'd made with him and Reese Muldoon. But yeah, just a little black comedy set around St Kilda, where I was living at the time, and about like a private detective, hence the crude title.
Yeah. So I always wanted to know what it was like working with Greg Fleet for you, and most importantly, did I inspire you to cast him, or did I at least make you go, oh, this guy's gettable?
Maybe you might. I mean, I'm always familiar with what's going on in the industry and like what other people are working on. So I was aware that you had worked with him. No, I have a friend here, Sam Peterson, who's a comedian, and he actually, I think, was the one who put me on to Greg.
They used to have a podcast together, those two, Greg and Sam. I used to listen to it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I know Sam's off doing another podcast, these days, a Confessions of the Idiots. Yeah, so Sam, he put me on to Greg, and, I got his details and I sent him the script, and the experience of working with him was great. I mean, it was a very short, we only had him for like a day, and then I remember we'd had to do some like pickup audio later on where he was like speaking on the phone. But he was great. He's as you know, he's a bit of a tough cookie, but, and he's got a pretty kind of colorful, history.
Absolutely.
I think, I was so impressed with his acting chops. Like, I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about comedians is they can make amazing dramatic actors as well. And so, you kind of notice it when you're in the presence of actors like, for instance, like, Reese Muldoon or, Greg Fleet, who kind of are from the same generation and are both kind of Aussie icons in different ways. Like, but they both have these incredible gravitas, I found, and presence on camera. And I remember feeling a little bit kind of intimidated by that or daunted, like drawn to it, but at the same time, like, wanting to make the most of it because, with these guys, they have a lot of experience and they've been acting for a long time. And so there's a bit of an ego there, that you would expect, that comes with the territory. But at the same time, though, he was so lovely and generous, and I'm proud of his work in that short, and it was a good experience working with him.
After the experience of making Dick, the next film you make is Nest, right? And that is dramatically different to Dick. This is black and white. Is it shot on film as well?
Shot on film, 16mm, yeah.
And so it's kind of experimental. It's kind of dramatic. I'll read the logline for anyone who hasn't seen Nest, because I know it was like a big part of your career. So on IMDb, it's an isolated father haunted by his child's cries of hunger takes up work as a timber feller, only to be stopped by a mysterious alarm coming from deep in the woods. So it's got this kind of psychological horror feeling to it, but because it's filmed on film, it's got this real kind of gritty realism, the crackle of the film, like the film grain, all that kind of stuff. Like, it really sets a mood, and that is what I assume is going to, when we get to the Latcher, kind of inform that kind of tone. I also thought with the plot to Nest, it's not dissimilar to the recent Netflix movie Clint Bentley's Train Dreams with Joel Edgerton.
I've heard about this one. I haven't seen it yet.
I mean, it's not. It's just a vibe and a kind of like a world, and it's a similar guy who's a lumberer, and that's based on a novella. So I don't know if you'd read the Dennis Johnson novella back in the day, but the film is definitely worth checking out if anyone's listening to it. Obviously Nest as well, definitely check that out. But I just watched this like a couple of weeks ago, so it's like fresh in my mind, and it reminds me of something I felt while watching Nest, which is like, this is kind of a pure form of cinema. It's so outside what I'm capable of doing, but it is just like, this is a very specific type of cinema. And I think Train Dreams has that as well. So definitely check both of those out if you're around. But Nest was a big deal for you. It won you a lot of awards. I want to know kind of what festivals did it get you into? What doors did it open for you?
Thanks for the kind words, man. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. I've seen a trailer to it, and I know what you mean. I felt, there feels like there's a bit of a kind of kinship in those two films. But and I love Joel Edgerton, so I'm excited to watch it. But I think really the short it evolved very organically, much like my feature would. The short, I guess. It's funny, but since we were talking about Lights Canberra Action, that it does actually tie back to that in a really funny way. So with the archive, I remember the judges at the festival when the archive had won Best Film at Lights Canberra Action, the judges said that it captured the myths of Canberra in a really interesting way, because we were sort of telling a story in a way about the National Film and Sound Archive and the old tales that it was a haunted, it's one of the most haunted buildings in Australia, is what people say. Because
it used to be the home of the Institute of Anatomy, right? So they were like cutting up bodies and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And that was a key kind of plot, element of our short. But, and, Pat Gallagher, who's another talented Canberra filmmaker, had actually written a script, which he had sent me, I think like years before we made the archive. But I ended up asking if I could adapt it for Lights Canberra Action because I had a take on it, and I had another kind of element with the ending, but the kind of world that was established that Pat had sort of written and sent me, I thought was amazing, and I didn't kind of leave me. So that's how we ended up co-writing the archive.
Was Pat's version a short film as well?
It was not a finished film. I think he was planning to make it as a feature. I could be wrong, but he had sent me some pages from it, and I remember it really stuck with me. And loving Pat's work and kind of wanting to collaborate with him on something, it just sort of stuck with me. But yeah, sorry. So to come back to the Nest connection with the archive, so when they said that we'd captured the myths of Canberra, I kept thinking about that, and I was like, I would really love to capture the myths of different kind of aspects of Australia. And originally I wanted to make a web series, and I was going to call it Fable. And I had contacted my friend Steve Anthopoulos, who wrote Nest, and who we had been friends for a long time, and he's kind of off doing his own filmmaking thing. But I just brought up the idea to him, and I said, would you have any interest in writing like an episode of this web series? And it's, each episode's going to kind of be on different myths of different parts of Australia, of different aspects of Australian mythology. And he found this one story about a lyrebird, which would halt logging operations by mimicking the sound of a fire alarm. So, sound familiar? That was the whole kind of concept behind Nest, and then Steve, of course, wrote this beautiful short and this allegory and connection between this man and this lyrebird, which is protecting its nest. He's protecting his family, and I was really moved and struck by the story that Steve had written. It wasn't quite there yet. Like it wasn't supposed to be an episode for a web series, which never eventuated. But I remember us trying to kind of get some funding through Screen Australia for it. We were rejected. But the story just kept stuck in my head. And eventually my girlfriend at the time, was studying at the VCA, and she was doing a bachelor of, she was studying to be a producer. And so we basically decided as her graduating piece, because she, again, this was COVID time, so all the rules were kind of getting thrown out the window. Usually VCA students would only work with VCA directors, like VCA producers would only work with VCA directors on their graduating films. But this was the first year where they were like, kind of all bets are off, because a lot of the directors wanted to have more freedom than they would be allowed, whereas my partner at the time really wanted to graduate that year. And so that was for the first time they were kind of like, well, do you have any other projects? And so she was like, well, I know, my partner's a director. And I was like, well, we got Nest just, sitting around in a drawer somewhere. Like, could we make it? And we decided to just go all in and invest in it and shoot on film. And I guess the vision was fully formed because it had been like a few years at that point that I'd been thinking about it. And it was almost sort of like the most vivid vision that I've ever had for a film, like came kind of fully formed almost like in a dream, where I just could see it in that crisp black and white and the grain. I could hear it. I could tell it was like there wasn't much dialogue. It was going to be really sound oriented. And it was just like a kind of a fever dream making that film. But I felt like I was just trying to capture that feeling that I was going for, or that I had experienced, and then I was just trying to make the film reflect that feeling. And, I feel like as filmmakers, we often strive to do that and we don't always get there. But Nest, I feel very proud of. I feel like it got about as close to it as I think I've been able to. And it did quite well on the festival circuit. And I think people were really struck by it because it was kind of in Australia that they hadn't really seen depicted a lot before on screen. It had a unique feeling to it and flavor to it. And I think the black and white was maybe a big part of that, and 4:3 aspect ratio. And but yeah, I guess, you know, so it was a little kind of bush fable, but it started potentially as a web series, which never took off. So, you know, maybe I'm grateful that it didn't, but yeah.
That's really cool. And I'm still in awe that you would shoot it on film in this day and age, because that must just add a lot of technical requirements that you and I maybe didn't come up using film. I think we just missed it. When I started, it was all mini DV, like when I was a kid getting a camera. So I've never dealt with actual film production like that, but I just want to hear a little bit about Making Nest and your experience using film.
It's funny, you know, yeah, it was kind of an alien medium to me. Like, I'd never had any experience working on something shot on film before. But at the same time, it's interesting you mentioned the mini DV connection, because it has a lot more in common with how we grew up probably than today. You know, I feel so, making films now digitally, it's so sort of intangible a lot of the time. Zeros and ones and hard drives and clouds, and that I often miss the days where we could just physically hold our film in our hands, you know, in a way, on these little mini tapes. Like, as kind of crazy and old school as that technology was, I think it made a lot of sense to me, and I felt like I had these physical memories in shoeboxes, you know. And now I've got Nest, like, it's literally there in my hallway, you know, as a film reel, like finished film, all of our rushes. So in a lot of ways, you know, yes, it was completely out of my wheelhouse, but I was working with a DP who, Campbell Brown, who is an incredibly talented DP and had experience shooting on film. So I wasn't really nervous. I trusted him and I trusted the team that we had together. There were a couple of moments, you know, where you're doing things like felling a real tree in the film, and we had like one take, obviously, and we're shooting on film and we didn't have another camera. And I remember even at one point, I think my DP, I'm not sure if he had actually brought he had like an Alexa Mini or something at that time as well. And I remember sort of saying to him, like, just for this shot, should we just, and he was like, nope, we're committed to film, like it's film all the way. And so it was a real, in some ways it was a real thing of just like trusting the universe. But yeah, it also felt like so many miracles kind of happened when we were making that short. It had this weird, mystical, spiritual, it might sound woo-woo, but it just felt like we were being guided in some way. And then when the film came out, it also felt like it just kind of took on this life of its own. And, you know, in some ways I was trying to replicate that with my feature, that feeling that I had on Nest of trying to kind of just like trust in the universe and let go and make way for sort of synchronicities and things to just fall into place, which by the way, did happen on my feature. Yeah.
That's so cool. I guess the thing about film is you don't have unlimited takes. It's like you only roll when you're about to roll the take, and you know that you've only got so much in the mag. It really means that every take is so much more important. Like, you get everything ready before you do it. You're not like, let's just roll one and see how it goes. It's like, when we're rolling, we have only a certain amount we can get done today. So I think that would like that. Working within constraints can sometimes breed creativity, and I can totally see that the focus everyone must have, where it's like, let's get everything perfect before we do it, and we know that we can only do this a couple times, we have to move on, we can only shoot so much today before we run out. I think that is really cool. I want to experience it at some point, but I also don't have the ambition to commit like you. So next time you do it, invite me to your set and I'll just watch for a day and say I can see what it's like. So when Nest came out, it got into a lot of festivals. Do you have any that you were like, this was the one where when we got the call or the email, we were like, oh my God, we did it?
I just want to touch on what you said as well about that, because I think that's a really good point that you bring up. And I think that in a lot of ways informed how me and my DP approached the shot listing. Like, every shot of the film was like potentially in my digital mind growing up, maybe 3 or 4 different shots, you know, edited together, which then became a oneer, you know, which I think in a lot of ways made the film more restrained. It made it more, deliberate and intentional and focused. And I think in that way, it draws an audience in more because, as you say, like, if you're cutting all the time and you can choose any angle that you want and you can, do things a million times digitally, you have to also think about the effect that has narratively and the impression that it leaves on the audience ultimately. Are they going to be as drawn in by it and feeling like, oh, those are 5 shots combined in one? That's interesting. We're not seeing that as much these days, as you alluded to, because we're not shooting on film these days as much. So I recommend you do shoot on film at some point in your life. And I'd recommend it to anybody, any director, because if you're working with a DP who knows how to shoot on film, which, granted there aren't as many these days, but they're still out there. I think that, and you trust them, then it's a really worthwhile experience. But, to answer your question about the festivals, the first one I remember just sort of like, just dancing with joy, like I couldn't contain myself was MIFF, was getting into MIFF. And I think we knew when we got our Australian premiere, which was also our, worldwide premiere at MIFF, we were like, this is great. This is going to open so many doors, for the film. And it felt for so long, I guess, as I alluded to earlier, banging on the door of the industry of Screen Australia and of festivals and feeling like I was kind of always on the outside, finally getting that kind of call to say that we were selected. And not only that I was going to be part of the MIFF Accelerator, lab, was really meaningful to me, and obviously a bit heartbreaking that, it did come out in that time when when the festival was sort of online rather than in person.
But that meant I got to see it because it was online. I logged in and got to watch it. I don't think I would have got to if it was, just the screening in Melbourne.
I like that silver lining. I think you're right. I think it touched a lot more people than I'm aware of. And I think that's the strange dissonance that I have with the film, where I remember a friend of mine saying at one point, he's like, man, you did it. Like, you're getting all this success, how does it feel? And I remember, and it's kind of a cliche that you hear, but I remember sort of telling him, like, it doesn't really feel like that. Like, I know objectively that it's supposed to, like, it looks good. I know that, but also, that's the thing people see, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. But the amount of festivals you enter that say no. And so many top tier festivals said no to Nest, but the ones that you see that you get into make the film look like a success. And then, you also have, I guess, that thing that I was talking about before, where I wasn't experiencing it with audiences, and I didn't necessarily know that people like yourself or other people were watching the film and were enjoying it. And so for me, it was this very strange kind of vacuum that I was living in at that time, where I was just like, I'd done this thing that I was, ostensibly proud of and was having this success, but I wasn't feeling it, and, but then ultimately that's also a learning curve. You sort of learn that shouldn't be what we attach our expectation to or our hopes on. Like, ultimately it's as I said, it was sort of a humbling thing to realize, like, oh, it's really about audiences. Like, that's what I missed growing up in Canberra, about just playing the film and experiencing the audience reaction with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that it made it to MIFF. I know what it's like to be on the other end of the film festival rejections, and what people don't realize that aren't in the film industry is each of those rejections also costs a lot of money.
Hell yeah.
It's not just a free entry. They're all like $40, $50, $60. So every time they rack up the rejection, you're like, that money just went to nowhere. After Nest, we get to... You follow the success with jumping into your first feature. Finally, you've obviously been champing at the bit for a long time, knocking on that door, and we get into the Latcher. So I want to know all about this journey. I've been following you a bit, but I still don't know much about the film, how it was made. So firstly, maybe just tell us like the pitch or the logline, or like, what is the Latcher about?
The story is, it's about a midwife, and she's trying to shut out this kind of unspeakable grief, of this personal tragedy that she's experienced. So it's a horror film. It's a psychological horror film and a supernatural horror film. But for me, the story, the concept that I really wanted to explore was all about this idea of sort of how we treat grief as this uninvited guest in our home. And we try to force it out. We try to push it away. And the more we resist, the more it persists, and that ultimately was sort of, what I wanted to say with the film. I think yeah, I read a book a while ago called The Uses of Sadness by Karen Masman, and it was all about that, idea that we, as a collective sort of society, are numbing ourselves constantly, whether it's through apps or through, not allowing ourselves the time and the space to really feel and let things in, and sort of be silent with our sadness or our thoughts or our feelings. And so I think for me, I related to that, and I felt like I was constantly kind of running from one thing to the next, and, that we have all these methods of trying to sort of escape painful experiences that happen to us. And I think, as I had just gone through a breakup before making the Latcher, I wanted to kind of turn all of that emotional feeling that I guess had been building up inside of me, and I wanted to kind of create a space for that. And so that's sort of, where the film came from.
Great. So you've got a kind of psychological horror with a haunted woman who's haunted by grief, and there's a bit of supernatural in there. I assume, judging by your other stuff, it's not like a gory blood fest. It's a bit more cerebral. It's a bit more tonally eerie. So it's not necessarily one for the people who are just like, I want to see some heads get chopped off.
No, it's, you're exactly right. It's the kind of horror that interests me, I think, has always been more psychological. I mean, to be honest, it's the horror that exists exactly in that intersection. And that's what I was really reaching for, I think, was that intersection between psychological and supernatural, because I think that's where the most interesting horror comes from, or the horror that I love the most. So films like Rosemary's Baby, Don't Look Now, a lot of films that aren't really made as much these days, but they're films that dealt with, both those films are like 60s and 70s. So they were films that had a lot of like social issues, but they were also really dense kind of thematically, and about relationships and about grief and about, our psychology, but they also had sort of a spiritual component, and there weren't any easy answers. They were quite ambiguous, and they didn't really package it all in a neat box and tell you whether something actually was, supernatural or psychological. And those are the films that really linger with me. And so, that's what we're hoping we did with our film, that was our ambition, was to try to make a film like that.
Tell us a bit about writing the script. Kind of how many drafts did you go through? Who are your collaborators? Had you written feature film scripts before? And like, where does this sit in that world?
Yeah, I had written a couple of features before. So, one of them was that Screen ACT backed one, which was about, actually, both of them were backed by Screen ACT. So, one was about sort of World War I, and the other one was the Maralinga story. And they both, I'd written both of them. They were both huge learning curves. They were both way too ambitious in scope. And that was a lot of the feedback that I was kind of getting from producers, was that, you're a talented writer, but like, can you write something that you could actually make, because a lot of these projects they were way too big. And I think this comes to sort of the philosophy of how I made the film as well, which was, I think as a lot of filmmakers, I mean, I'm not sure if you relate to this, but we all felt for a long time growing up that the only way to make a feature was to have the studio or have the, screen funding body green light you and say, here's the stamp of approval, here's your $1 million, go make your movie, And I think that kind of myth, in a way, that we were sort of sold or told, actually hindered a lot of filmmakers, especially in Australia, where there's a bit of a tall poppy syndrome, where we're full of a lot of talented people that want to make things and want to make long form things, but it feels like we're up against this system that's only really allowing some special few through, and that it's a lot more of a sort of lottery than anything else, And I think for me, it was kind of shifting that mindset from, I need to ask somebody else permission to make this film, and sort of learn to give myself permission the way that I always had with shorts. And so, a big part of that was scaling everything way, way down and working out like what was the most bare bones kind of version of a film that I could make, with practically nothing, just resources that I had. So the Robert Rodriguez kind of school of filmmaking, and I had read his book, Rebel Without a Crew, and that was a big inspiration to me. It was, it was adjusting my expectations. It was making a film that felt like it could be made for nothing. And then convincing my friends and family who had seen the success that I'd had with Nest that I was ready to make my feature. So they would, not a lot of money, but they would all kind of throw in a little bit of something, and we would gradually we would start just by shooting the film, and then once the film was shot, we would then have some Class B investment. We would go back and we would try to kind of, finish the funding and get the film over the line. And so it was a long process, and we were shooting on weekends, around people's full-time work commitments and such. So, and that was also something I'd heard that Nolan had done with his first film. And so it was really just trying to kind of go, okay, like, let's be really realistic, and let's just work with what we have. And as you've said, those limitations, those constraints can totally free you up, and you can create some pretty great stuff when you're kind of under those kind of constraints. That the pressure can kind of breed a really interesting collaboration and creativity. So I actually co-wrote the script with a VCA graduate, Brody Marchant, and he was an ex-colleague of mine, and when we were working together, I'd kind of brought the idea up to him of doing a feature just at a bar after work one day, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I'm in." And we just we kind of organically let the film grow. But I guess the very first concept I had that I brought to him was sort of, and it was sort of done in a bit of a fairy tale structure, but it was ultimately about this woman who had lost a child, and that was the very kind of, beginning, I guess. And that kind of, grew from there.
Did you have an audience in mind or a target demo? Did you ever have to make pitch materials to try and get funding or investors involved? Like, were you thinking about the commercial side of it, or was it much more of a personal story and an artistic expression?
Yeah, we did. We actually did talk with a few different producers and distributors, none of which ended up kind of coming through for us, but they did have some pitch materials early on for the film, and so there was that, and there was a bit of an angle at a certain time where I was still, couldn't let go of that idea, or that maybe I needed the industry's help, so I was still sort of talking to some producers, some pretty heavyweight producers and distributors, but ultimately, no, it was completely independent. And my investors, yes, we definitely laid out our case for why we thought it was a good bet, and with the team involved, and a bit of the kind of aesthetic of what we wanted to do with the film, and some test shots that me and the DP had done. But yeah, no, it was completely independent. So it was pretty. There was a lot of trust that went into it.
That's awesome. So no government funding, just you, friends, family, like people chipping in, no distributor attached. That I love to hear that getting told no didn't stop you. It just actually kind of solidifies you, like, well, I'm doing it. I'm diving in even harder now.
In a way, yeah. It was sort of that, even hearing or speaking with distributors who were like aware that I was just going to make this film. They're kind of like talking to me on the phone, and then after a while, when they're talking about how I'm going to do it, and they realize that I had it all kind of, had a lot of it kind of figured out. They were like, it kind of sounds like you're going to do this, like whether we say yes or no. And I was like, yeah, exactly. And I think that in some ways, ironically, that's what makes them interested in you, because they know this is a film. This is a film that can take seriously, that's actually going to be made, and it's not just going to stay on a shelf.
Do you remember at what point you made that transition in your head to full commitment, we are making this no matter what? Or did you have times where you're like, oh, unless I can get this partner on, I don't know if we should bother?
It changed form over time. So there were actors that dropped out. There were characters that ended up, because an actor dropped it, then we questioned, did that character even need to be in the script? So things just kept changing, and it was very fluid. Like, it was never, I don't think it was ever just like one set thing that we were kind of like banging our fist against it. It was really organically evolving, and getting better, I think, at every turn, with our collaborators and just, the research that we did. But no, I think I always knew, I had that confidence from a young age that, that this was all I wanted to do. So I think because I'd been yearning to make a feature for so long, it was like, by hook or by crook, we're going to make this thing. It was just, we weren't really sure what form that was going to take necessarily until it got made. And it was, it was a process of years of us, writing and shooting it and reshooting and editing. So Yeah, it was a long, at times arduous process, but ultimately it was very, very rewarding, and it was like just the most creative and the most problem solving that I've ever had to do. Obviously, as you know, when you're working in long form, it's a game changer. So
let's get into a bit of that process. So you said you were shooting on weekends, like over what period of time, how many weekends, and then were you editing in between? Did you sometimes have a couple months off to like put together what you had and then go, oh, for the next block, we'll do this? Like, tell me a bit about the actual on-set scheduling.
I mean, we were shooting weekends, so we did have that period in between, which was great because it was a chance to sort of look at the rushes and reflect on what we had and what we didn't have. And as you know, these films aren't made in a linear process, far from. You're shooting everything from the ending of the film at the beginning, and then you do in the middle, and it's kind of all over the place. And I really credit my lead actress, Lucy, for being able to like hold the center through all of that, because, I didn't honestly know if we were going to have something that worked until I started seeing Lucy's performance as we would move it around and start to watch it sequentially and go, oh, I think this is going to work. And so, yeah, I had one of my co-editors, Harry Kurzel. He was basically doing the assembly edit as we were still shooting. So we were able to get a bit of a grasp on like what the story was, and that was building some of my confidence. But at the same time, that process went beyond that. So after Harry had done a cut, and then I was working on it, and I was working on it with my co-editor, Shannon McAllis, who also did Nest, worked on Nest with me as another co-editor. And so it took on different forms, I guess, with different people. And then once we sort of realized, certain things about the ending weren't working, we would then go back and literally, it started off as like a crew of like maybe a dozen, and it ended up like just me and the DOP and the actress literally going like under my house and going, all right, let's get a little, pickup shot. And that was really nice to kind of bring it all back to those indie roots. And that's where I'm most comfortable anyway.
And how long did you film over? Are we talking 6 months, a year? Like, what was your production schedule like?
Yeah, look, it was kind of haphazard because initially there was kind of a big block of a few months where we were trying to shoot the film in around 20 days. And I'd also heard that was sort of what was, recommended during MIFF Accelerator Lab by Justin Kurzel, actually.
That's what we did 21 on me and my mates, and then one pickup day a few months later. And I think Snatches, which is a Canberra film that was made recently, was also 21 days. So I think it's common, yeah.
You would have gotten the Justin Kurzel tick of approval, because he was like, for the scale that you guys are and as first time filmmakers, like that's what you should be aiming for. We ended up shooting like beyond 40 days. So it was like double what we had set out to. But that was also because organically the film just kept growing, and because we had the trust of the cast and crew and we were all doing this kind of around like work commitments, we all wanted the film to be the best possible version of the film. And so as I was able to sort of like show early cuts and really like it was such a collaborative, I can't even describe how collaborative the experience was. Everything from talking to the DP, to the actors, to the writer, to the editors, everybody was molding the film as we were going. And it was always like best idea wins. And it just felt like the film took on a life of its own, and we were all just like, kind of just trying to like catch the wind with the sails kind of thing and just see where it took us, right up until literally, I think it was maybe a week. It might have been less, it might have been a few days before the cast and crew screening that we did. And that was, not this October. We finished the film this year, but it was actually last October. We did like a cast and crew screening before the film had the finished sound and the color and all of that, just to show everybody what we'd done at the Thornbury Picture House. And it was amazing because we had literally shot like the last shot of the film like that week before the cast and crew screening, so literally to the last minute we were just shooting, trying to figure out what the film was. And then we had this great screening and we felt like, okay, that works. And we did a little bit more editing, a little bit more polishing after that, to be honest. But pretty much people got to see pretty much what the film was going to be at that screening, which was cool to be able to like experience that with the people that made it. And since it was such a collaborative film.
What was the toughest moments you pulled off, or like the biggest challenges you overcame with this film?
There were a lot. There's an element in the film. So there's these moths that appear many times in the film, and I wasn't really sure how we were going to do that. And I remember one of my executive producers being very skeptical about how we were going to pull this off. And I wasn't really keen on using visual effects necessarily. We were trying to. We actually did have a moth wrangler on set, so we had somebody who actually had real live moths flying around, but as you can imagine, in camera, the moths are so tiny, it's like it wasn't making much of a visual impact. And we ended up having one of our assistants on the film, this is just one of the many amazing miracles on the film, was also a visual effects artist, and a really talented one. And he was very modest and kind of kept up his sleeve. And then as he started showing me tests of what it could look like, I realized, like, this is amazing, like looks as good as something that a visual effects house could do. And so we just kept doing iterations of those VFX until pretty much most of the moths you see in the end film are like visual effects. But I'm very proud of how realistic it looks, and what that guy was able to do, given that he said at the beginning, he's like, I'm not an animator, I don't have that skill set, but I'll see what I can do. And, you wouldn't know it when you watch the film.
That's so cool. So 40 days of shooting over a long period of time, working with Lucy Lovegrove again, who I think was in one of your earlier shorts as well. And where are we at now? Like, so the post is fully done. The film is locked, sounds mixed, colors done.
Yep, film's finished. It was an enormous kind of feat this year, getting the sound design. Ryan Granger, who's amazing, worked with Natalie Erika James previously on Relic and on a couple of her short films like Drumwave, and Kurzel was the one I think I first sort of got onto him. And he did an amazing job. Those guys were so great. They worked for such a limited budget. It was an amazing collaboration. Like, I sound like a broken record, but it really couldn't have been made without all those people sort of just believing in the film and wanting to be a part of it. And, they didn't have to help us out in that way. I mean, I was expecting by this year that we would maybe have some sort of a distribution situation locked in, because we'd talked to a lot, but we didn't. And they still were like, well, we believe in the film. We want to see it over the line. And just sitting down with Lucy, who's a good friend of mine. We've known each other for about a decade at this point, and just sitting down together and watching that film after the enormous kind of journey of making a feature, and watching it on that soundstage with those guys that had brought it over the line for us was really moving. And so the film's finished. It looks great. We're kind of awaiting festivals at the moment. So we're submitting to festivals, and we're eyeing for a worldwide premiere at a big festival next year, but we're just kind of waiting to find out.
I do want to get into the plans for the release, but I'd also really want to know, so you co-edited with two other people. What software are you using? What process is that like? You said one of them was kind of putting the assembly together. How much of it is you together versus taking turns or taking chunks and then sticking them together?
Yeah, it was a mix. It was so we worked in DaVinci Resolve. As I mentioned, Harry was the first editor that was working on the film, and he was cutting it and putting it in sequence for me, so I could kind of get a sense of what was going on. I'd give him notes as well as we were going, but then I would go back for certain sequences that I kind of saw a certain way, or that I didn't think he'd quite grasped how I wanted that to feel, and I'd go and I'd recut those sections, and I'd show it to him. We'd put it into the timeline, and it kind of went on like that for a little while. Then I brought Shannon on, and he kind of was more of like a polishing editor, but he did end up actually contributing significantly to the film, and even in terms of some story moments and just certain things that were working really well and other things that kind of weren't. And he came in with some great suggestions about the ending and about different things that we actually did go back and reshoot some stuff. And then I was just sort of like cutting it after that. And then I even had an assistant editor come on at the end and sort of clean up some of the finished cutting that I had done. So it was kind of, the whole process was a little bit kind of pieced together and haphazard, but Again, as I say, it's so sort of organically evolved that, we didn't have like one set process. It was sort of more just like whatever way we can get to the best possible finished product, you know?
And in terms of distribution or sales plans, have you been taking it to the kind of film markets or just talking to distributors personally? Like, where do you see it going and what's your kind of hope for it? What's the dream for the film?
Look, I think we'd really love to have it screen next year in festivals. I think, as we talked about earlier, theatrical and the audience experience is such a huge part of why I do this and why we do this as filmmakers. And so to be able to watch it with an audience at a festival is, I think, still the greatest joy. So that's really the ambition at the moment. It doesn't go too far beyond that. I mean, we want to partner with some distributors down the line, but we're hoping that the film will attract the right kind of audience and the right kind of, partners and home for the film based on, wherever the film's resonating most, really. And just sort of, leave it to fate, like the making of the film.
I've got a few questions where I might need you to get a little vulnerable. So I just want to hear, like, what do you want this film to do for you? What's the dream for it? And then what's the kind of barometer for success? Because I think when you have these, you have, at least you have really lofty ambitions, and then you also have like, here's maybe a more likely ambition, and basically here's my bottom. I just at least want to hit that, Can you talk about any of those feelings?
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest with you, it's a great question. And I'd love to be vulnerable about that. To be honest, like, I saw a quote by Prince, which I shared a little while ago to one of my Instagram stories, which really resonated for me. And it was all about, like, as artists, we often feel that we have to put something out into the world and see how it is received, see how much money it makes, see what critical attention it gets, blah, 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 in order to know, was it a success? And he said, but as musicians, we know that the act of creating something from nothing is inherently the success. And beyond that, it's all just cherries on top, kind of thing. And I loved that quote because it made me realize, like, as you know, it is an enormous mountain that you climb. And I have so much respect for you, for other filmmakers who make that leap from shorts to features. And people don't realize how hard it is. And, so I totally understand the Chris Stuckmans of the world who, went from being film reviewers to feeling that I don't really know how I can go, in all fairness, go out criticizing these other filmmakers when I know how difficult it was to make a feature. And I think I kind of fall into that camp as well, where I feel much more, that the success of the film was just making the film. But what do I want it to do for me is a really good question. So I guess, if I go back to my original intentions, it was to make the first feature film, I guess, in a way. It's like that sort of you're popping the cherry as the filmmaker that was always a short filmmaker. Now you've graduated to, you're a feature filmmaker. So that's also been accomplished. But in terms of, what would I love for the film? I'd love for it to be embraced by audiences. I'd love for it to, move people or at least make them think. I mean, we're dealing with some pretty heavy topics in the film, but it came from a place of really sensitive conversations with, like, parents who'd actually lost children, which we had, arranged through Red Nose. It was, speaking with midwives through the research and bereavement midwives. Like my second cousin's actually a bereavement midwife, and she was a great resource. So, and all those stories that we were told, and the truth, I guess, the beautiful and heartbreaking kind of truth in those conversations that came out, feeling that we did that a justice and that we can put something forward that we feel proud that we were, like, custodians of those stories of, extreme vulnerability and sensitivity, and put that sort of work out into the world and not have it exploit or offend, but have it, I guess, open a conversation and make people reflect, I guess, on something that is kind of a painful reality for a lot of people. So,
yeah, thanks so much for saying that. I think what you said about accomplishment and actually just finishing it is the accomplishment is a through line of this podcast that I think anyone who listens to multiple episodes will find. This is how we think about it. Our answer to the question of where do we want this to go, what do we want it to do for us, maybe in the back of our head it's win an Oscar and make $1 million, or at least get me my next film up. But you'll find that people's legitimate answer is, especially when you're in this marathon, is like just hitting the finish line and having to have it done. I totally understand that. It reflects my thoughts exactly. And if you come to my house, I've got a big poster of the film in my garage, and I've got the DVDs on my bookshelf, and I'm like, it exists. It's a physical thing. I did it. And I've got the same for albums that I made with my band and CDs we have. And it's like, that is honestly enough. Anything after that is gravy, is the cherry on top. But the way we think about it is like, and anyone who's made a film will relate. You'll notice that people who have made films are much less critical about films because they understand there's like a mutual understanding of we've been through the trenches together and a mutual respect. And that's why filmmakers don't usually talk shit about each other. You know, it's just so much harder because we know what you go through, and just getting it over the line is where all the respect comes from. So I do want to ask just the last couple questions as we wrap this up. What do you wish you knew before you started this film? Like any piece of advice or even practical things that you're like, that would have really helped me beforehand?
It's a really good question. I don't have sort of regrets in life. I think, you know, there are things that you wish you knew, or you could go back and you could change, or you could take back. But I ultimately think like that's part of the learning process, you know, it's part of the journey of becoming. And so I think like I wouldn't necessarily want to change anything or alter anything, because I don't know how that would play out. But I guess, you know, just hypothetically, I guess what I would tell another filmmaker, you know, about to embark on this journey is it's such a test of endurance. Like more than anything, I think you kind of will go through in your life. And it constantly tests you to prove how much you want that thing, you know, and you have to really want it, and you have to work more than you ever thought you would have to in order to sort of see it over the line and get it finished in a form that you feel good about. And I think that is ultimately the thing that I would just tell, you know, another version of myself or another filmmaker about to make their feature, is just like, it's a marathon, and also try to enjoy the process rather than fixate on the product. I know as a directors, that's a big thing that we do, is like we have to do that. We have to hold the vision, the big picture vision of what it's going to be, so that everybody can kind of believe in us and the project. But at the same time, enjoy the process of collaborating, even the moments where, you know, you're conflicting views with collaborators and life's really testing you and you don't know how you're going to get through it. Like, all of that is part of the process. All of it makes you who you are as a creative and as a problem solver and as a leader, in a way, you know, of this big kind of ship. So yeah, I would just say enjoy the process and be aware that it's going to be longer than you think, and you're going to have to want it again and again and again, and it might take years, you know, but ultimately it's worth it. You know, I wouldn't take any of that back. So
yeah, all of that resonates with me. I'm sure people did tell me those kind of things, but it's the idea of enjoying it in the moment is so important, because you have to step back and go, we may never be here again. Definitely not with the same people in the same place. I mean, unless you do a pickup shot in the same place. But, you know, like, everyone's committed to this thing and we're all here together. And regardless of what happens, like, we're making movies. I've seen on Tarantino sets, he gets the whole crowd, he says, and why are we here? And he gets them all, the whole crew, to say, because we love making movies before takes. And it's so corny, but it's like so true. And there is this sense of imagination and play. And at the end of the day, it's like adults playing pretend and putting on costumes. And it's like going back to being a child and having whimsy and chasing whimsy. So I really love what you said. You were talking about what you would tell a young filmmaker. My big last questions for you were about what you would tell a young filmmaker who is sitting here. And while you were talking, I was thinking that if you're going to make a feature, you're going to not want to finish it. You're going to think halfway through, it would be easier for me to just walk away and never finish this. And you're going to hate your own film, and you're going to love your own film, and you're going to be embarrassed by it, and you're going to be proud of it. And you're actually going to hold all of these feelings at the same time. And people are going to be saying that they have thought it was amazing and that they loved it and supporting you. And in your head, you're going to be like, that screening was horrendous. I'm embarrassed to have been standing up next to it. And then you're going to have other ones where you're like, I'm feeling the wave of people enjoying this, and I'm so glad that I did it. All of these things are natural, and they're all going to happen. So when you first see your assembly cut, you're probably going to think this thing is unsalvageable. What were we thinking? Why did I do this? And as long as you just always have that attitude of we're learning, we're making something, we're chasing whimsy, we're hanging out with creativity and people, and we're just all in this together. That's what it's all about. So my question for you, sorry, that's me ranting, but my question for you is, if someone's listening to this, young filmmaker who wants to be a director, who thinks, what skills do you think they need to possess? Because if you were going to say, look, before you make your film, make sure you have elevated this particular skill or got a bit more comfortable with X or Y, what are those main things? Because filmmaking is not just, I'm so creative and it's all imagination and everyone's having a good time. Like, you're also like a project manager, you're a logistics operator, you're a producer, you're reading schedules and doing paperwork and insurance and stuff. There's all these other skills that are outside of just, and we're having fun on camera. So like, what skills do you think you would tell a young filmmaker they should get before they dive into their first feature?
Surround yourself with really good people. And they don't necessarily have to be the most experienced people. I think that's important to say. You know, when you go to these networking events, or you're looking for someone who's done exactly what you want them for on your film, I don't actually think that's as important as finding people who align with you in that, just as you said, they're excited about making films. They want to be there. They have a certain staying power. You know, they're persistent people. They're not just going to kind of flake and ditch the project when they get bored. You know, people who you feel are kind of, you know, loyal, hardworking people who are generally pretty smart and generally pretty good kind of like problem solvers, because I think that they don't necessarily have to have the exact skill sets of like a first AD or just pulling it out there like a production manager or whatever. Like, as long as there's somebody who's got a sense of organization, they can do the sort of skills that you need from them. Don't worry as much about what are their prior credits, because you just want to find a family, I guess, ultimately a family of people that you have hard times together, you weather the storms together, but you believe in what you're doing together as well. And you're not just going to kind of abandon each other and, look for the next kind of shiny thing. I think for me as well, with the collaborators that I'll come back and work with again and again, they are those people that do, possess those qualities, or they haven't sort of let me down through the process. I think that's a really important thing. And it's something that, again, it's a trial and error thing. You kind of have to have a go, just start making shorts, just work together, see if it works, and then just try to replicate that, I guess, on the feature. But yeah, I think it's just, finding good people, surrounding yourself with good people. And in terms of skills that you can kind of develop within yourself, it's being willing to be vulnerable, open-minded. If you have a vision for something or you really believe in something, don't be a doormat, like stand up for it, and give your reasons why. And I found that's part of the process, is you're constantly tested, whether it's through your collaborators or whoever, making you get clear on why it is that you want something to be a certain way. And it can be frustrating, and you can be like, because I just do, but like, you have to get good at kind of articulating why. And it's okay if you don't know the answer right away, if it's just more of a subconscious thing. But if you really believe in it and you really feel strongly about it, I think you will come to that answer the more you reflect on it, or the more kind of conversations and even arguments, debates that you have with your collaborators. Yeah.
James Hunter, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing with us. What is the best way to support you? Where should people go to follow the journey of the Latcher?
Yeah, people can follow the film on Instagram. So it's just at the Latcher on Instagram. And we're going to keep sort of posting behind the scenes. We've posted a bunch of behind the scenes photos, with poster, trailer, as we continue to kind of, get new announcements about the film. When we find out what our big festival premiere is going to be, we'll be posting everything there. So that's probably the best place for people to follow the film. Also, people can find me on Instagram, beyond that, my website's jameshunterfilm.com, and
Awesome. Congratulations. Can't wait to see it. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the chat.